So we've talked briefly about selection in an earlier lesson, trying to play pots where we have equity and always own some share of the pot. This lesson we're going to talk about which hands are good to get involved with in what types of situations before the flop. If you follow this guide, most of your decisions after the flop will be relatively easy and straightforward. In poker, we always want to keep our decisions as easy as possible while at the same time putting our opponents to tough decisions. And by pos EV spots, I mean situations that should show a positive expectation, so we win money in the long run. So when looking at our hands pre-flop, we are looking for hands that play well in both multi-way or in heads-up pots. An obvious example of a good heads-up hand would be pocket aces, where we're 80% to win against any random hand heads-up. But once a third person is in the pot, our equity drops to 60%, and by the time 3 or 4 players are in the pot, we can't even expect to win this pot half the time. Heads-up hands are ones we expect to win the pot a high percentage of the time, but only if we are facing one opponent. The types of hands that fit this description have high top pair potential, so if we flop top pair, it will usually be top pair, and as well, usually if we flop top pair, we will have the better kicker, so we will win if our opponent also shares the same pair as us. And also, we want hands that are already made, so the big pairs. With heads-up hands, we don't want to get ourselves into kicker trouble, as I said. We want to benefit from our opponents being the ones playing raggedy aces, making top pair with no kicker versus our top pair, good kicker. With these hands, we want to open for a raise to get the pot heads up or simply steal the blinds. Raise big if there are limpers for the same reasons, attempting to get the pot heads up or simply win the blinds. And finally, re-raise if someone has raised, because flat calling the raise would simply invite others to play as well, and we would no longer have a heads-up pot. We would be in a multi-way pot. So the other hands we look for are hands that play well multi-way and have what I call hard ways or jackpot potential. The hard ways and jackpot term refers to the fact that we don't hit that often, but when we do hit, we get paid a very large amount. So with these hands, the more players seeing the flop with you, the better, because there are more potential people to pay you off. So for an example, say you have pocket eights, you're looking to hit the hard 8 on the flop, make your set 3 of a kind. It'll happen about 1 time in 8. But if you follow the system, the times that you do hit and win will show enough profit to make up for all the times that you called trying to hit your hard way set and missed. So it will still be positive expectation to play these types of hands. The hands that play well multi-way are ones that can make strong hands like sets, so pocket pairs hit a third card on the flop. Straight potential, so any sort of connector, 1-gapper, 2-gapper can also make straights, but the more connected the hand is, the more possible nut straights it can make, and we're always looking to make the nuts when trying to make a made hand. And finally, we have nut flush potential, so that would be any sort of suited ace, because if you hit a flush and someone hits a smaller flush, you will actually have the rare situation where you have 100% pot equity, and that is a wonderful thing. So the reason these hands play well multi-way is that once they do make a made hand, so make the straight, the flush, or the set, they will usually have 80% equity or more, regardless of how many opponents are in the pot. So the more people to potentially pay to see our hand, the better. Lastly, we look at the Shortstack Killers. These are the hands that have high card and top pair potential, which is also known as showdown value. These hands are the ones that will play well if we get all in before the flop, and we will hope to win more than 50% of the time whenever we're getting all in before the flop. These hands will only be important in rare situations where our opponent has 10 to 20 big blinds, but in cash games we run into a lot of people who play short stacks, so I will teach you how to make life as difficult as possible for them, because real deep stack poker players, we hate short stackers, and we want to do everything we can to make their life hell and try to get them to stop taking up seats in our games. So we'll talk about ranges later, but the idea is that we only want to play the top half of hands that our opponent is playing, and that way we can always expect to turn a tidy profit by playing all in pots against them, because we'll have the best hand more than half the time. and it actually works out to about 3/4 of the time I think we have the best hand if we're only playing their top half. So that should show a good win percentage. So when we get to the player analysis section, which I think we'll start about lesson 8, you'll learn how to determine what types of hands your opponent likes to play, and in turn which hands will play well against those hands. So just as a quick review, when we have a heads-up hand, we're typically looking to make the majority of our opponents fold, so we will be raising or re-raising to thin the playing field. With multi-way hands, we will look for a spot where the pot has been opened and called in at least one spot, or limped ahead of us, so we could over-limp if the pot has been limped to hope to see a multi-way flop. And should it be raised behind us, as long as a couple of the limpers ahead of us call, we can also call as well and still have a multi-way pot. Or, in the case of a raised and called pot, we can then call with our high potential hand and hope that others do the same behind us. If the flop comes out just right, we will have a very good chance of getting paid off, because the first guy who raised has said he has a strong hand that he probably doesn't want to fold, and the callers in there, if they hit a decent hand that's not quite as good as ours, well, they're going to be paying us off too. And finally, the Shortstack Killers will really cover a lot in the player analysis section, because the short stackers, they play pretty well and they're pretty tough to beat, but there are definitely a couple tricks we can throw at them that they can't really fight back against. So hopefully by now you have a good feel for the core concepts that make a successful poker player. Next lesson, I'm going to finally give you guys a hand chart guide so that you can get involved in spots with high expectation and avoid troublesome spots. Hope you guys took a lot from this lesson, and I hope it helps you when you hit up the real money games or even our free roll tournaments and start playing real poker.